Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Thursday, June 12th, 2025. Today, we're going to talk about what agricultural term best fits you, Comfrey, and a disease/cover crop question. So let's do it. All right, happy Thursday to everyone out there. I hope you all are doing well. I've mostly been harvesting and planting here, as it should be, but I'm also a bit behind on field work as it goes. Luckily, with Hannah back in the mix more, we're able to accomplish a few more things, which is wonderful, and hopefully means I'll be catching up soon. I've just got like a bed or two that are ready to be flipped and are telling me about it a little bit. One thing I didn't get to shout out this week was on the trip that we took down to Red River Gorge this weekend that I talked about on, what was that, Monday, Tuesday? On that trip, we actually took the opportunity to stop by our friends Maggie and Will's place at Old Home Place Farm in Eastern Kentucky, and that was very cool. Shouts to them for hosting us. They are a cool CSA farm tucked right in the mountains, a couple hours from here. That was part of what is called a TOPP program, or Transitioning to Organic Partnership program. And I'm not sure what the future of that program is right now in terms of funding, but it is cool. If you've been an organic farmer for a while, remember this is like the first year since like 2017 that we have not been certified organic. So we have a lot of experience with it. This program has you like mentor people who are transitioning or certifying or interested in certifying for the first time and have questions about how all that works. You can talk to your local small-scale agricultural group about it. Like ours is run through the Organic Association of Kentucky, OAK. So talk to your local agricultural group about it because you may be able to get involved there. But shouts to Will and Maggie and all the other awesome Appalachian gardeners that we got to drive by in the mountains there. Some amazing-looking gardens. I think it would be really fun to just stop by and say hi to some of those because I'm sure there is some old Appalachian wisdom there that would be very fun to talk about. Anyway, it is Thursday, and on Thursdays, we like to catch up on Patreon questions, of which there is no shortage right now because it's the spring/summer. So that's great. Keep them coming, Patreon members. Today's first Patreon question comes to us from Stefan R., who writes, quote, "Hi, Jesse. I had been gardening in the suburbs for a couple of decades, Zone 7B, in limited quantities and usually only two varying crops per season. I have had a bunch of successes, tomatoes, peppers, sweet potatoes, corn, etc., and failures, potatoes, tomatoes, etc. We called it practicing for retirement since I have always wanted to grow at a larger scale later in life. We retired in January, congratulations, and are moving to our North Georgia mountain house, Zone 7A, with several acres of land, mostly forwarded, but good open bottomland. I built a fenced-in market garden, 3,500 square feet, with permanent beds, and a fenced-in food forest, 6,500 plus square feet, which I could expand at will. I had already planted chestnuts and blackberries, so we're harvesting those, but in the last year, I also planted a bunch of other fruit, and this year, I planted a bunch of annual vegetables as well. All of these are in larger quantities than ever before. It's amazing what you can accomplish when you don't have a job anymore. My goal is to grow for ourselves and give the rest to family and friends. I was still calling myself a gardener, but I am not selling any of it. But everyone has started calling me a farmer, which I like, but is it true? I believe that farmers sell products. It's just me doing almost all the work by hand and with some help from my wife, so it will never really get large scale. So my two questions that might apply to many others. One, am I legitimately a farmer? Two, is it still called a market garden if I'm not selling at market, or what is it called? Thanks for all your advice, Stefan. Totally enjoying retirement." End quote. Thanks, Stefan, and I actually really love this question. Semantics conversations are always fun because they are both completely absurd and completely serious all at once. In my experience, most people will not care about these titles until someone brings up a question like this, and then suddenly we all have very strong opinions. So, although I hesitate with any sort of gatekeeping here, and frankly, I think you should be able to call yourself whatever terms you like, I have some simple definitions that come to mind when I hear these terms based on how I typically see them used or hear them used. For instance, farmer is a term that, as you implied, that I most commonly associate with farm businesses. This can be livestock, textiles, food, grains, whatever, but in order to be a farmer, I feel like when this term is used, generally sales are involved. Now, hobby farmers are those that maybe sell a small amount, but don't really rely on it for their livelihood. The term hobby farmer is mostly benign, like doesn't have like a positive or negative connotation necessarily, but I do sometimes see it used as a bit of a pejorative, a term occasionally used to mean that a farmer doesn't earn enough to cover his or her costs, or doesn't realize that they are actually losing money or whatever. But by and large, hobby farm means you grow a lot of food, but maybe don't sell it. Okay, so market gardener is to me a similar term to farmer in that it is attached to someone who gardens professionally for an income, but it can be used a little looser in terms of you don't always have to sell at a literal farmer's market. Sometimes people will say something to the effect of I grow in a market garden style if they don't sell at a farmer's market, referring more to using perhaps semi-permanent beds and pathways and all the small intensive production stuff, but not selling at a farmer's market. Market gardener is usually relatively small scale, kind of intensive production, everything from a backyard to a few acres rather than like a dozen acres. When you get beyond that scale, like that, I don't know, up to that like 8, 9, 10 range, you tend to start hearing the term market farmer more, which is usually someone who sells at a market but grows on a comparatively large scale. Now, there are also terms like homesteader, a term commonly used for people who grow gardens and mixed fruits and often raise some chickens or small livestock, but mostly for themselves and are not selling it or much of it to other people, similar perhaps to like a hobby farmer. Homesteader is a bit of a controversial term, perhaps, for its relationship to the Homestead Act, which had people going out west to settle land, to keep indigenous populations off, which has not only ruined the land and had its intended effects on the native populations, but likewise led to the building of houses far away from one another, inadvertently engineering the farmer loneliness epidemic we are seeing today. A rant for another day, perhaps. The term gardener, for its part, is almost exclusively used for just small-scale gardening, whereas hobby farmers and homesteaders often dabble in animals, orchards, etc. Gardeners are usually just in the garden. Now, one I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on is the term grower. I think of that term, grower, as more broad. It includes people who produce food professionally, but I don't think it excludes those who don't grow professionally but treat their gardens with the same level of care. It's typically smaller scale, but more like a market garden tends to be just a few acres versus dozens or hundreds. Grower could also mean you don't just garden, like you have fruit trees and such. I still associate it with businesses, and maybe it's just it's a close synonym to market gardener, but I do think it can encompass more things like fruits and flowers and perennials, etc. With the amount of food it sounds like you are producing there, Stefan, it sounds like if you are not a grower now, you will be soon enough. You will have to find somewhere to take all that food. Your question also makes me think a little bit about how Anthony Bourdain went through somewhat of an existential crisis after he retired as a chef, of people wanting him to still call him chef, like when they would see him out at bars and stuff. And I think it kind of came to this, like at what point does someone have to stop calling themselves a chef? Or in our case, like what point would someone have to stop calling themselves a grower or a market gardener or a farmer once they retire from the profession? It's also another part of this question I think would be interesting. Anyway, what say you all? How do you feel about these terms? Are there any terms I left out or got wrong? Let us know, and we'll chat about it tomorrow for Feedback Friday. Otherwise, it's break time, and when we come back, let's get comfrey. That worked. BRB. Today's episode is brought to you by Precip. Precip is billed as the easiest way to keep track of rainfall, and that is true, but it is a lot more than that. Sure, you can open the app and immediately see accurate rainfall totals, but you can also save locations to see historical rainfall totals, wind speeds, and all sorts of other nerdy details. Their radar-based technology means you can ditch the rain gauge. I usually have to do that anyway because the kids find a way to smash it with a baseball bat. You can ditch the rain gauge and start tracking rain and other growing conditions all on your phone. Click the link in the show notes to find out more. Today's episode is also brought to you by Farmhand. If you're listening to this, you probably found 5 rare minutes to breathe. But what got pushed back further down the to-do list to make that happen? If it's your CSA newsletter, you're not alone. Farmhand's new newsletter builder was made for busy farmers. It automates weekly emails, drives add-on sales, and makes it easy to keep your customers in the loop without spending hours behind a screen. It launches this summer, but our listeners can request early access now. Visit farmhand.partners/no-till. That's farmhand.partners/no-till. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this podcast, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, Today's second Patreon question comes to us from Patreon member Oksana Rotkowski, who writes, quote, "Hi, Jesse, could you please talk a little bit about Comfrey? Sorry if it was discussed and I missed it. I remember it trending maybe a decade ago as a prominent source of green manure / compost activator ingredient for the teas, mulch, etc. I have a few plants, non-seeding Bocking 14 variety, tucked into otherwise useless corners of my yard, and they thrive on neglect. Bees absolutely adore them, and they do produce an abundance of green mass over the season. I use it in cut and come again fashion when I remember about them, and use the leaves in my compost as a green mulch. So my actual question is, do you think there's as much value to it as the internet claims? Appreciate the feedback in advance. I really enjoy your daily pod, lots of great info, and I always have great takeaways and food for thought. I have a small home garden in Zone 7A, Long Island, New York, and really enjoy pushing the limits and trying to grow unusual for here plants, for example, pomegranates, hardy kiwis, etc. Plus lots of veggies, of course. P.S. You got my first name nailed down, so don't feel obligated to additionally muscle through the last one. Laughing emoji. Thanks." End quote. Okay, so great question, and I agree. It did feel like a decade or so ago everyone was talking about Comfrey, and now the buzz has died down a little bit, perhaps because people actually tried it. Kidding. I actually really love Comfrey. It's a great plant. We have Comfrey plants in a few spots, and I would happily grow more of it and probably will. So anyway, let's talk about what Comfrey is and how it can and maybe should be used. First, Comfrey is a really widely adapted perennial plant, able to grow everywhere from zone 4, so pretty cold, to zone 9 here in the US, so that would be pretty hot. Comfrey can grow in partial shade or full sun. It is relatively thirsty crop, so if you're in a drier region, it will definitely take up some of your irrigation. Used traditionally as a bone healer, I actually knew it not as Comfrey when I first learned about it, but as knit bone for its use in poultices to treat sore muscles or broken bones, etc. In fact, traditionally, it's been linked to a wide range of medical uses that I'm not going to get into because that is not my field of study, and I don't want to make anyone sick. And that's especially true as Comfrey has also been linked somewhat lightly, but linked nonetheless to liver injury when it's consumed. So most medicinal plants have some level of toxicity when ingested in certain quantities or certain ways. So that's not surprising, but just, be smart about how you use Comfrey, especially in terms of oral consumption. How Comfrey is typically used in a garden is for pollinators. That's one. It has a nice little flower that attracts in, like you said, various bees, albeit not necessarily your native beneficials. So make sure it's not your only flower if you are not in a region where Comfrey is native. Or, I mean, don't let it be your only flower no matter where you are. Anyway, it is also used as a border around trees and growing areas to keep weeds out, which it actually does a pretty decent job of because of its vigor and the large leaves that shade basically everything below them. Now, not all Comfrey is right for planting in and around gardens. A cousin of borage, which itself has a propensity to spread its seeds quite abundantly. Some Comfrey can spread by seed. So that Bocking 14 variety Oksana talked about is important. Not that I think you could easily find other versions of Comfrey, but if you live somewhere that it is growing wild, I would not recommend digging up the wild Comfrey and transplanting it near your garden, as it will likely invade. And buy it from reputable sources as well. That dude on Etsy selling Comfrey may not know what they are selling. The Bocking 4 and 14 varieties are sterile. They're just a cross between two varieties that produce a sterile seed, and it's generally spread by cuttings rather than seed. So anyway, for planting, like most things, transplant cuttings into fertile, well-drained soil. Again, it will grow in some shade, but if you really want yield out of it, you will need full sun. In the early spring, you can harvest the lush, thick leaves, and for us at least, it usually is flowering by the end of May, and the leaves get a little bit less big. The leaves can be used as a fodder for livestock to some extent, but not all livestock love it. It is high in protein, relatively speaking, as well as phosphorus and potassium, and certainly micronutrients, which it mines very efficiently with its deep taproot. But even to most livestock, it's mostly medicinal, and they don't want to eat it abundantly. Some may ignore it, some will eat it lightly, and some, like pigs, I think, really enjoy it. Anyway, the leaves can be used a little bit as mulch on a small scale, but it would require quite a lot of Comfrey and work to make that effective on larger scales. Oksana mentioned using it in the compost, and that's great there. Like I said, loads of nutrients in Comfrey leaves, and it decomposes readily. Some folks I see give it a lot of credit as a compost starter, and it definitely can do that. But to be fair, any wet green matter shoved inside the middle of a pile of raw compostable material will heat up. So I don't know that it's necessarily better than others, but it certainly can work that way. You kind of just crush it up, get it wet, and throw it in the middle of a pile, or spread it throughout the pile to add some good nutrients to it. Some folks also ferment it into a fertilizer, or even kind of blend it into water and let that seep a little bit, and then use that as a fertilizer around plants. Maybe more on homemade fertilizers later, though, because it is an interesting topic of conversation, and there are some small studies about the efficacy of using Comfrey, but we'll get into that a little bit more detail later. Personally, I love having Comfrey around. I have seen how effective it is at blocking out weeds. So as a border, I think it makes a lot of sense. And as a flower, it is a solid one. And as a plant, is it a pretty one? So it checks all the boxes, but it's not something I could use in, say, my living pathways, as it is just too big and bulky, and it wouldn't want to be stepped on quite that much. Soon, I may, however, work towards cutting some roots and transplanting more Comfrey around my orchards, because the weed whacking is... well, I'm a little over it. Anyway, now that we are kind of through that last decade of Comfrey madness, how are you all feeling about it? Had successes? Horror stories? Did it meet the hype for you? Anyway, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, I don't exactly know how to describe this last segment. Maybe cover crops versus disease? Yeah, be right back. All right, so if you're watching on YouTube, all this mass you see here, that is all Comfrey, and it's probably what stretches about 10 or 12 feet. And it isn't a bunch of Comfrey plants coming up like all through here and all over there. It's actually just one tall plant that grew up and then just kind of fell down and continues to grow back up. So yeah, Comfrey is serious business. Today's episode is brought to you by FarmRaise. Still struggling with your balance sheet? Your lender's asking for a balance sheet and you're stuck with a spreadsheet mess or guessing your numbers? FarmRaise Tracks takes the stress out of farm finance. With one click, you can generate an accurate, up-to-date balance sheet that shows your assets, liabilities, and equity. No accounting degree required. You'll be ready for loan applications, tax season, or just a clearer picture of where your farm stands. Join thousands of farmers using Tracks to build stronger businesses. Get 20% off with code NOTIL20 at farmraise.com for the lifetime of your membership.
Today's episode is also brought to you by Peaceful Heritage Nursery. If you're looking for hardy and resilient fruit trees, berry plants, or pawpaw trees, then check out Peaceful Heritage Nursery. Peaceful Heritage Nursery LLC is a mail-order nursery shipping premium quality fruit trees and berry plants across the USA. They specialize in resilient, non-GMO plant genetics for small growers. Their diverse selection includes berries, cold hardy figs, passion fruits, gumi, mulberry, and much more. They're famous for their diverse selection of premium quality grafted pawpaw trees. 5-star Google ratings and customer testimonials attest to their commitment to excellence in quality and service. Find them at peacefulheritage.com and join the mailing list. Once again, find them at peacefulheritage.com. Use the promo code NOTIL for 10% off your first order. All right, back to the show.
All right, our third and final Patreon question of the day comes to us from Carson Christian, who writes, quote, "Hey Jesse, I'm considering starting a new organic no-till market farm for 2026 season in North Central Ohio, Zone 6A. I have been researching like crazy the past 3 months and settled on the techniques I want to use. You have been a great help in keeping me interested. As you may imagine, I'm now finding myself knowledge rich and experience poor. I have some local friends who operate a small organic farm using various tillage techniques. One area of their farm was dedicated to ornamental pumpkins last season, and they lost nearly all of them to some kind of blight. They intend to let the area lay fallow this season. It's currently a 40 by 50 foot tilled and bare clay soil area with low organic matter. I have volunteered labor and seed if they will let me attempt to cover crop it this season. What I would like to do is plant a cover crop that can grow through spring and a chunk of summer, then be crimped and occulted, like occultated, I'm assuming, with a tarp, then plant through that with some fast growing squash using the cover crop as a light mulch. Not looking for a squash crop, just want to see if it gets the blight or behaves differently before it gets frost killed. Is this even feasible on this year's timeline, or am I just wasting my effort? I'd love to hear your recommendations on what cover crop or cover crop blend would work in this scenario and any other thoughts you may have. Thanks again," end quote. Okay, so thank you. This is a fun and interesting question. Now, this came in around a month ago, so it may be a little late. My apologies there, Carson, but let's talk about this because it brings up some interesting things. First thing thing it brings up. Is there a spring/summer cover crop that could be grown and killed and create an adequate mulch by the middle of summer? To that, I would say yes and no. Killing summer cover crops with summer techniques can be a little tough. Something like sorghum Sudan grass can die under a black tarp, like you mentioned, after several weeks, but it is ornery stuff. So it has to be at least 3 really sunny, hot weeks to really do it. Solarization, for its part, can work on that crop, but I can't make any guarantees there. The one time I tried that, this was like 2018 or 2019, it worked to kill the grass, but it also to kill the sorghum Sudan grass, but it also germinated weed seeds from deep in the soil in that area that I previously had no weed issues. So there's that. If the weeds are largely under control, you could maybe use something like pearl millet or cowpeas or both that won't have as much of a mulching effect, but will die easier. Now, though, to the other part of your query here about planting a quick growing squash to test the efficacy of the cover crop in terms of like disease suppression, yes, it would work. But if these growers plan to plant like another squash next year, I would honestly not do this particular experiment on this particular plot. I think it would be an interesting trial for sure. And I'm not saying that the cover crop will or won't work, but growing another squash there may just further propagate the disease that they had issues with last year for next year. I would instead do a trial like that in a smaller area away from where their production might take place. That said, I do think a cover crop should go there if they don't plan to plant anything else. Absolutely. Keep that soil fed and in place. But I just wouldn't include a squash crop there unless they have no plans for squash crop there next year or the year after. However, if they don't plan to grow pumpkins or a squash next year and are happy to allow you to play around, then sure, I say give it a whirl. Anyway, great questions, and I think that's it for this Thursday. I look forward to your comments from the week for tomorrow's Feedback Friday. Last thing I wanted to mention, in my book, I acknowledge a handful of the amazing moms I've had in my life and dedicate the book to them. And this week, sadly, I lost one of those moms. I think we all have those people in our lives who are like bonus moms, who care for you and take care of you. And Carolyn was the best and will be missed dearly. Sending my love to the Breeding family and to all the bonus moms out there. You rock. Don't forget, No-Till Growers is now officially a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. You can learn more about how to do that in the show notes. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That's an easy way to help us out. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor the show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at no-tillgrowers.com. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and the team at No-Till Growers. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook or the Seed Farmer at no-tillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of June, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs this week to Stephanie Somer, James Cole, and Jay Parmley. All right, so as you will recall, our gardeners, the young ones, are standing there stunned as the older gardeners are embracing the new alien ogres that have arrived. What is happening here? The residents of the retirement community are clearly not what they seemed. The ogres hand the older farmers like a jug of something, and then the older farmers head off into the woods. And I mean, the young farmers are just completely confused. But the older farmers ask the young farmers like to not follow them. It's not safe, they say. But of course, one of the younger farmers can't help themselves, and they decide to at least kind of spy on the older farmers in the woods and figure out what they're up to. And they see the older farmers, they're like digging up the same glowing root that came out of their pockets. They're digging that up out of the forest, and they're digging it out of the forest floor, and they're bundling it for the ogre aliens, like in, I don't know, packs of 10 maybe. They bundle a few hundred of these like 2-foot long pieces together, and the ogres pack it up, and then they leave back into the sky, just kind of disappear. And of course, the younger farmers are left just being like what? Like, what just happened? What was in the jug? What was the root? Where did that come from? How did I not know that was there? And all of that will be answered tomorrow on the Photon Farmers Have a Secret Garden of sorts. Thanks for watching and or listening. We will see you then for Feedback Friday. Bye.
Can I be forgiven?